Hello, welcome to the European Green Deal Show, brought to you by LP Brussels. I'm Mark Watts. I'm going to be your host and your guide over the next months, maybe years, as we go on a journey, guiding you on twists and turns in terms of delivering the Green Deal here in Europe, and also keeping an eye on the rest of the world as well. Delighted to be joined by my colleague Ryan Hunter, who's an expert on all things climate. This is a world first, Ryan, a program going live every few weeks about the European Green Deal. Why is it so important?
Hi, Mark. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to this, the launch of this. Honestly, we felt like there was a conversation to be had about the European Green Deal and about where it stands in the international context. So often we're very Eurocentric. We talk about the European Green Deal from an internal perspective, but there's a lot to be said about how the European Green Deal stands abroad and how it fits into things like COP26 or even recent increases in US climate ambition. And this is an opportunity for us to really bring that forward.
Well, that's exactly, I think, why we're here, why we've launched this. And we want everyone to join in too. People can ask questions. They can comment in the chat function. They can email us before or after the show. We'll do our level best to address and answer their questions. But let's just remind ourselves, Ryan, about the European Green Deal. It was launched some time ago. And of course, events, dear boy, have taken over slightly, namely the pandemic. But let's just remind ourselves, perhaps, what the European Green Deal was all about.
I want Europe to become the first climate neutral continent in the world by 2050.
Most importantly is the works which are going to be done.
Appropriate support for their new obligations.
We need everyone, and no one will get left behind.
As we continue to battle the pandemic, we must also focus on our long-term challenges. This is why the Green Deal, as a growth strategy, remains our compass throughout the recovery.
We will reduce emissions by at least 55% by 2030. And today's agreement puts us on a clear path towards climate neutrality in 2050. It gives certainty to investors, to businesses, to public authorities, and to citizens. It future-proofs our union.
Well, there we are, Ryan. That was the ambition announced by the European Commission when they delivered their Green Deal. Are they on track in terms of delivering that ambition?
Well, that's a great question. And I think to answer it, you have to divide the ambition from the list of initiatives that make up the European Green Deal, because those can be seen as two very different things. The ambition is quite concrete. Become a climate neutral continent by 2050. In between now and then, you have several milestones that you need to hit, namely this 55% emissions reduction target by 2030. Now, in that regard, it's hard to say now, right? As many reports say, we're not on track for that. Now, as regards the list of initiatives that the European Commission hopes to make the European Green Deal a reality, by their own standards, yes, because there is no deadline, really. They hope to get it done by the next European elections. They hope to get it done in the next 3 years. They seem to be on track for that, but whether these things enable the EU to become a climate neutral continent by 2050, remains to be seen. Hard to answer now.
So obviously we're going to be coming on to COP26 in a moment, and that will be an opportunity, I guess, to benchmark EU progress against the rest of the world. And no doubt you'll be commenting on that then. But in terms of actually delivering it here in Europe, there's a lot of excitement about the Fit for 55 package. But what does that mean? What are the real milestones to look out for? And how can stakeholders, organizations, companies, NGOs, citizens influence the delivery of the Fit for 55 package? Let's remind ourselves, they've got less than 9 years now, not just to deliver the package, but in the first place, they have to agree it in a short space of time to reduce emissions in Europe by at least 55%. I mean, how's that going to be possible, Ryan?
Well, it's as the video we just saw shows us, that it's quite a holistic view of the entire European economy and how you leverage even some of the most polluting sectors like the transport sector to not only be a climate laggard, but even a climate leader. How you view this? Well, it does help to look at this in terms of 2030, 2040, and then 2050, dividing it up across those three main milestones, because the key here is that you don't want to leave most of your actions to the latter end of that cycle. You would like to stagger it quite evenly, but we are quite behind. And so there is a lot of acceleration required. And so this is quite a huge and ambitious package. Let's be very honest about that. It's fantastically ambitious if you ask some. Whether they can deliver on that, we'll see. Now, how can stakeholders get involved to get their perspectives across? Well, you do have consultation opportunities that the Commission opens up once it publishes the package, as it has done. You also have other initiatives down the line where the Commission will be consulting with stakeholders prior to publication. But in reality, it's really about plugging into the political process, because beyond just the European Commission, you have the European Parliament and the European Council looking at this. And they're going to need a lot of perspectives to input here because of just how big this package really is. And they're not going to tell you they're experts in everything. They're not on the ground. And so businesses, companies, and so on need to get involved, get their perspective across, even just for the sake of expertise on the matter.
Okay, that's an important message, I think, to convey to everyone viewing this program, that it's not a process in isolation. It will need stakeholders to engage to make sure the ambition of the Green Deal can be delivered technically. But perhaps we're going to turn to COP in a moment. But how does this fit into the global picture, Ryan? I mean, Frans Timmermans has been touring the world, pretty low key, I must say, though, in the last few months and weeks, rather overshadowed, I think, by John Kerry and Alok Sharma. But I think he's been quite conscientious in terms of strengthening EU leadership in the run-up to COP. How do you view that? What's the view in Brussels? Has that been a success in terms of EU leadership, or too early to tell?
Well, just to remind viewers that Frans Timmermans oversees this whole European Green Deal, and he is in effect a European climate ambassador, if you will. So his job is to go around the world to showcase the European Green Deal and to use the European Green Deal as sort of a credibility thing to get other countries to increase their own commitments, in the sense that, look how much we're doing, you must do more. It's been tough for Timmermans because he's constrained by some internal debates on the Green Deal, and that EU leaders and even his own European Commission are looking quite inward right now at how they can actually achieve their own ambition, never mind go around the world to get others to increase theirs. So he has a kind of two hats, right? His internal side as head of the European Green Deal, but also the external side that I think has taken a hit during the pandemic, especially, versus John Kerry or Alok Sharma, as you mentioned, who I think have a bit more freedom, as their roles don't really entail any kind of domestic agenda. They're just solely going abroad to be this climate envoys that they need to be. and also that the US and the UK have been more important, quite frankly, in the build-up to COP than the EU has. Not to say that Timmermans won't once again step into that role post-COP, because the EU has to have a voice here. But since the Joe Biden administration has come in, I think Timmermans has taken a backseat to John Kerry.
Okay, Ryan. Well, that's a very clear view from yourself, and I think that's probably a widely shared view here in Brussels. We're now going to start looking at COP, just 3 days away now. I think the world will be watching Scotland in a few days' time in the way that perhaps has never happened before. I think it's the largest political gathering of its kind in the United Kingdom, certainly the biggest in Scotland. It's great that we're going to bring onto the program live from Scotland our expert in Scotland, in the UK, on climate and all matters transport, particularly the maritime sector in Aitchison. But before we bring Ian in, let's just have a quick look at what the European Commission are hoping to get out of COP26.
Leaders from all around the world, we need you.
We need you with us to fight for climate justice,
to protect biodiversity and human life,
to cut gas emissions drastically,
to move from fossil fuels to renewables.
We need richer countries to provide more money to help poorer ones go green.
We must limit global warming now.
In Europe, we set ambitious targets with the European Green Deal. It is an opportunity to change our economies,
to create green jobs,
to grow sustainably.
But if we want to succeed, we must all work together.
Il est temps.
We must act now.
Timpul s-a terminat.
Nous devons agir maintenant.
El tiempo se ha acabado.
Wir müssen jetzt handeln.
Bisogna agire ora. Tiden är ute.
We must act now.
Musimy zacząć działać teraz.
Well, welcome, Ian. It's great to see you live from Scotland. Just a few days to go till COP26, a historic but incredibly important series of meetings will be held in Glasgow. What is the view from Scotland in particular, but also your view in the run-up to COP26? The Commission have said it's time to act. Will COP26 see the action that we need?
Thanks, Mark. Nice to see you and Ryan. I think the question is, we just don't know. There are huge ambitions for COP. The Prime Minister's led from it, as you've probably seen, and Boris Johnson's getting involved very much, perhaps late in the day. But they're keen to do something. But he's backed off it latterly, politically, because what he's trying to do is very difficult. Clearly, we had the announcements in Paris that we were going to agree to 2050, but now is the time to deliver. And whether people will actually step up to the plate, it's going to be very interesting. So I think the jury's out. People are not sure. Parochially, a lot of people are more concerned about whether they could actually get to COP to start with physically. But fortunately, the proposed rail strike is off, so that you will be able to travel from Edinburgh, which is after 40 miles, very easy to travel, and hotel accommodation as all these people fly in for COP in Glasgow. So I think we're looking forward to it's an exciting time. I would like to think we get something really exciting from it, but I think it'll depend on the energy. So one hopes as a Scot that we can host well, give people a great time, put them in the great mood, and they do the deal. I mean, you've just seen some very powerful and emotive videos, and I think we need to, it's time, as you say, time is up. We've got to do it. I'm chairing another event just very shortly to do with Aubrey Mayer, who's been at it for 30 years and was involved with COP3. And his we've got to contract and then converge. His philosophy is still as valid today as it was back in 1997, that somehow we've got to find a way politically that richer nations can cut and support and take a hit economically to support those who are not there to do it. And unless we can get agreement on that, we'll never get there. But I think that the view is optimistic, but realistic at the same time.
Well, we're touching perhaps on that realism, and a question really for you, Ian, and also Ryan. I think it's probably, okay, maybe it's not surprised us, but it's only shocked us, that UN Environment Programme report that came out this week called the Heat is On, about the climate gap, which showed, if you add up all the commitments and all the pledges and all the mitigation measures, we're still on track for world temperatures to rise by not 1.5 or 2, but 2.7% by the end of the century, according to the UN. I mean, if that isn't a wake-up call, what is, Ian? And then do you think, this is really going to turbocharge COP26? Or, as I think the view here in Brussels increasingly, COP is an important milestone, but it's going to be the follow-up action. It's really the momentum that COP can generate that's probably going to be more important. Over to you, Ian, first, and then love to hear Ryan's view from Brussels.
I think from my point, yes, I'd agree. It is a milestone. It's a chance to put some weight behind the wheel, to give it a push, to keep us moving on. I think for me, perhaps the change between this COP and previous ones is the fact that we don't have the debate whether it's happening. I think there's now an acceptance that global warming is happening. There are some clearly who don't believe it is, but I think the facts and figures and the UN announcement earlier in the year, which said very clearly, the climate panel said, look, this is the facts. There's no doubt about it. It's time to act now. So yes, I'd agree that, but I think it is the follow up. And looking at some of the figures I've been looking at this week, I mean, the speed of decline to get to 2050, which even now people are saying is not good enough. We need to get 2040. And I'm also involved in the livery movement in London. And our Tacitus lecture there was a wake-up call for me, because talking about trade and the impact is all going to perfect. It's too late. We will see impact. It's a case of how much we can limit the impact, but there's no doubt we'll see impact. And we're not just talking about the drama that we see on the news with its flooding in Germany or forest fires in California, but we have real risks in the planet now of harvest failures, significant harvest failures, and not just a sort of politically inspired change that caused all the huge problems we had in 2011, but we could see a major famines in major wheat producing, or we live on a very fragile planet, and I think I'm involved, as you know, in the logistics business, and we're used to a just-in-time world. We just you put it on, you click of the mouse, and the thing turns up with Amazon the next day. We've seen some issues with that as they cover from the pandemic, but this will be nothing compared to what happens if we have major climate destruction. So yes, I think to answer your question, it's a milestone. It's not going to solve everything, but hopefully we can keep things moving on and perhaps turbocharge a bit. But I don't think it'll be a panacea and everything will be saved because of COP26.
If I could bring Ryan in now with a view from Brussels, do you want to take a view on that UNEP report and the role that COP will play to perhaps turbocharge the momentum that we need to turn this around, essentially, because we're not heading in the right direction? Is that the right assessment, Ryan?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And hi to Ian from Scotland. It's great to have you with us. I think that from Brussels, the conclusion was clear, and it's always been clear, is that the world is not doing enough, and that includes the EU. Hence the need to turbocharge the EU's own emissions reduction target, get that agreed, and then try and leverage similar commitments from other countries. This is the international context that we mentioned earlier. Thus far, I can't say it's been a success, because you still have many countries that haven't even produced an NDC coming into the UN, coming into COP, which was one of the basic criteria they had to do. That's just a plan of what each country wants to get done and needs to get done and is willing to get done. And if you can't produce that, then that's a pretty dire state of affairs. And I know that the US and the EU and the UK have been putting a lot of importance on this COP. And certainly it will do its bit to turbocharge the fight against climate change, which many people have realized is increasingly important during the pandemic as well. I think it is also time to look just a bit beyond COP26. A COP is not the end game. COP is just going to turbocharge our fight. It was never going to really create a new agreement. There's never going to be a new Paris agreement. If anything, it was just, as Ian said, just going to turbocharge our efforts, and hopefully post-COP countries will leave with a clearer idea of what needs to happen.
I think another point I'd make, Mark, is the bit of coming together, and there's a lot of debate about, climate, can't you guys do as we're doing here? Why you're not on screens? It's a climate conference, for God's sake. Why are you all flying into Glasgow to do it? And there are mitigations taken to try and, sustainable airline fuels, etc. But it's that the connections, and this is why I think it's important. If people can have a good time and be hospitably treated in Scotland, that can do as much as anything, because it's the relationships you be about, the conversations they have outside the meetings and the networks that will then lead on, as Ryan says, to beyond COP, where people say, we talked about this idea, how are we going to do it? And people, I'm involved in the business as with the fuels and marine side, but we're going to need everything. The speed at which we need to do this, there's not one answer. We need every answer. I've been involved this morning, just in fact, with some carbon capture and storage. Now that's an interim measure, but at least gets us, if we're having to use fossil fuels, well, what can we do to mitigate? So carbon capture storage clearly is one mitigation, because we can't go to renewables immediately unless we're going to stop. And I think for me, the exciting thing is, how do we keep the world moving on, but go to a decarbonized world? And I think some people just say, we've got to stop everything and decarbonize immediately. That's not realistic. And I think that's it doesn't do enough for the human ingenuity and the excitement for me. There's a huge exciting thing here to put a target out there to business, and I think it's bringing both the public sector with the rules and regulations and the fairness of it, with a clear direction for finance and for others. And I know that finance is a key part of this COP. It's unlocking the money that will get us moving on. So in that sense, I think COP is particularly important, that if we can get the finance figures together to release it, and we're seeing that in climate bonds and other things, and businesses are having to change the structure in order to put forward sustainable bits. So I think we'll see more and more of that, of stakeholders who, the pension funds who own the banks, etc., saying, look, we don't want you to be financing this. You've got to start helping to finance the way forward.
Indeed, finance is going to be critical to finance the transition, and as you say, to make finance an instrument of policy change. I'll bring Ryan in a moment about that, particularly what's going on the taxonomy file in Brussels. We're not hearing a lot about that at the moment. It'd be good to get an update from you. But coming back to you, Ian, as you say, it's not all bleak either. I mean, the UK is a global leader in the sense that the UK has reduced emissions, I think, since 1990 by about 40%. People forget that. There's been tremendous progress by some countries like the UK to decarbonise, and indeed the UK's plan is incredibly ambitious as well. But there is one sore thumb that sticks out in the UK and everywhere else, and that is transport, Ian, which is, I know, one of your key areas especially. What do you think's gone wrong there? I mean, every other sector, energy, house building.
I think well,
but not transport. Is that a fair criticism of the transport sector?
I think possibly and possibly not. Like any good person, on one hand you could do this, on the other hand you could do that. Yeah. I think also one has to recognise the UK being heavily reliant on coal initially for power. It was an easy win. Move to gas or nuclear and you can cut significantly. So the UK was in a position to do that, but we were huge emitters. So we have to be careful before we are. But there's no doubt about it, we've cut hugely in the United Kingdom. But transport, it is a hard to emit sector, and how to abate sector rather. How do you do that? And steel manufacturing, we've cut some of that. We've outsourced it. Have we outsourced our carbon? But we still have steel production. We still have cement production. These heavy. How do we do that? And transport's another one. So from our side, the work is involved in moving to gas as a move forward that, but biogas potentially, carbon neutral products and synthetic. But if we're moving to synthetic fuels, because energy density is such a key thing for heavy duty transport, whether that's big, particularly in Europe with the legislation for articulated lorries, there are a lot of power to drive these things up and down Europe. Likewise, ships around the world's oceans. That's not something you can do easily on a battery. So while cars relatively easy, and we're seeing huge moves, particularly, if we look at Norway, particularly, not part of the EU, part of Europe. 60% of new cars, I think, are EVs, if not higher. Huge movement within Norway, and we'll see that roll out across Europe. But for the shipping sector in particular, where do we go? Ammonia has been talked about, hydrogen talked about, but there are issues of safety with all these fuels. But I think we'll need everything to get there. But all of it will come back down to renewable power, and there's going to be a huge demand for renewable power. And we've seen a lot of, whether it's solar or wind power, to create the hydrogen which we can then use. And how do you store energy? So I think there's going to be a lot of, and that's the bit where ideas and sharing, which I think COP is vital to get people together. Who's got good ideas? Who can say the idea? Where do we go with it? But I think we'll start to see, and we're already seeing, huge investment Clearly, Scotland's not the ideal place in the world to put solar panels. We've got a few people putting them on the roofs again a bit, but really you want to be Saudi Arabia or middle of Australian desert for that. Arizona, perhaps. But wind, we've a lot of wind, not just in the studio here, but out in the North Sea, particularly, and that's where we can generate quite a bit. The irony for me is that we've got used to Scottish oil as it was in the debate. We sort of pulled it from underground, had been trapped for millions of years and released all the carbon as we pulled the gas ashore. But we could use that infrastructure that's there, with to stick some wind turbines up there with your electrolysis to pull the hydrogen out of the water, and then the methanation plants to put into carbon back into the hydrogen, and you create synthetic methane, bring it ashore, and hey presto, you can carry on. But we've pulled the carbon from the atmosphere, not from millions of years of underground.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Ian. I'm going to hear Ryan's reaction to that, but also the view, I know some shared by many, that the waiting is not a plan. I should say many countries haven't submitted their national plans for 2050, let alone for 2030, and many countries actually are forecasting their emissions will go up in the next 10 years, when the UN is saying you've got to cut them up by at least 55%. Is that one of the tests, the measures of the success of COP26? They'll get countries to recognize that waiting is not a plan, that we must act in the next 10 years, not the next 30.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the benefits of COP, even beyond the actual meeting, which has many benefits, as Ian outlined, was pre-COP, where all the diplomacy has been unleashed by the US, the UK, the EU, towards the bigger emitters to get some sort of plans publicly announced ahead of COP. And, you know, ever since the European Green Deal came out, you've had a host of countries announcing climate neutrality plans by 2050, 2060. China recently announced an end to funding coal abroad. You know, these are not small things. Now, granted, it's nowhere near enough, but, you know, if you can get those kind of commitments going, and you create some sort of snowball effect down the line, and you leave COP with a sense of urgency, I think that there's no ceiling on where countries would be willing to go with these commitments, be they willing to accept some of the economic hit that comes along with it. And what Ian said about all solutions being required is very pertinent today in Brussels, with talk about nuclear and gas and what role they play, be it in a transition, be it as a longer term choice. You know, the question on everyone's lips is, can we afford to close doors? And the answer, that's being discussed right now.
I think I just make a point.
Ian, just on the finance bit, which you raised, Ian, just a view from Brussels there. Is Brussels on top of that issue that Ian's raised, that the finance market must change? Is the taxonomy file going to be delivered on time?
Yes. So the taxonomy is just the EU's sustainable finance criteria, trying to direct money towards green or climate mitigation technologies. You know, this has been delayed, and earlier this year was passed, but they had carved out nuclear and gas for a later discussion, which is happening now. And essentially, what it all comes down to is how you get labeled will determine whether an investment in that technology can be labeled green or not, which ultimately, as we get further in this fight against climate change, will make a big difference to projects, to companies, you name it. And the EU's made some good progress on this. Of course, it is one of the files that gets the most attention, as it involves money and where money goes. But if they can solve this nuclear and gas problem, then I think they have a good thing going.
Okay, well, we're going to bring Ian in now, but before we do, just say that Ryan, I know, is keeping it on top of the taxonomy file, and indeed all the Fit for 55 package files. Actually, it's a different package, and I think you're going to put a link below this YouTube video, so that everyone can keep track live. I believe, Ryan, you're going to keep it up to date of all the rapporteurs and all the shadows for all the files, So people have no excuse whatsoever. They will know every single twist and turn of this very, very exciting process as these proposals go through the European institutions. So thank you for doing that, Ryan, and do click on that link below. Final word from you, Ian. I'm sure you want to react to Ryan, but what will you be looking for in particular over the next 2 weeks?
I think it's the mood music. I think it's not necessarily what's said on the line of any the communique that comes out at the end, but what's written between the lines. What's the feeling? Is there a coming together? Are people moving in unison? Do we see are people getting closer together, or are we seeing fractionated into camps of the haves and have-nots? That'll be the main bit for you next week, and hopefully we can see a greater coming together and driving it forward.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ian. I'm sure you'll be joining us again as we start to see real delivery of the increased ambition that hopefully COP26 will generate. Ryan, a final word from you. What will you be looking for over the next couple of weeks in terms of COP26?
All eyes on Scotland, which is which could be a very good thing or a very bad thing.
Only good, Ryan. Only good.
Very, only good. As Ian said, of course, the mood music is crucial, especially if we look beyond COP and we look towards a coming together of countries and moving forward together. This is really now the real end game of what we're looking for. I don't think we're looking for a communique to show us the path forward. I think it'll require a coming together of some countries or a group of countries to make it happen. And that's what I'm looking out for, is what happens in COP, what happens around COP, bearing in mind you have other side events with companies and so on, also very important.
And indeed, let's not forget, we've had the world's probably, it's only in our generation, the world's worst ever global pandemic, disrupting those real in-person meetings that we need or needed in the run-up to COP. And I guess it's amazing that we've been able to put it off in the way that we have. It's been delayed, sure. And as you say, Ian, getting people together in Glasgow, however challenging, is probably so important in terms of driving this agenda forward. So do you want to just come in back on that?
So,
Ian?
Mark, just to add on that point, I think let's forget. I mean, it's very easy to be doomsday and it's dreadful, and we recognise there's a problem. We're not going quick enough. I don't think anybody debate that. But at the same time, I think what's really exciting is you've heard, in the spite of this greatest pandemic we've had in our lifetime in this century, we still maintained a focus. Timmermans and the team in Brussels have still kept, in spite of the pandemic, kept going on the Fit for 55. It was delayed, but it did come out, and there's still a focus. So I think that's a very positive point, that we're still, despite what's being thrown at the people, the policymakers are still focused on the climate.
Well, thank you, Ian, and really, once again, thank you, Ryan and Ian, for contributing to the success of this world first live European Green Deal show. We're going to be doing this every couple of weeks, but in fact the next one will be a special one, of course, on the 10th of November, which, as everyone knows, is Transport Day at COP26. So we'll be going live again. We hope, Ryan and Ian, you can join us once again to give us an overview of what's going on in Glasgow on the 10th of November on that key sector that, as we all know, the emissions have been going up, not down, since 1990. So look forward to all our viewers tuning in again. In the meantime, do like this show, do share, do comment, tell us what you think, table any questions, do subscribe, ring the notification bell. But above all, thank you for your time, and see you in a couple of weeks. Enjoy COP26, and let's hope it's a great success.
Thank you indeed.